Thank you everybody for being here. I want to thank Jay Wells, the Zephyrhills Museum, for inviting me. A special thanks to Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated and Mr. Wayman Brothers because they give me the chance to be here and to speak about the Tuskegee Airmen. So we start from March 24, 1945. At the Diversification Air Base in Italy, pilots from America's first all-black fighter group took part in a mission that went down in the history of World War II. Their mission was to escort B-17 bombers on the first leg of an attack on Berlin, and their direct orders were to protect the bombers at all costs. Over German skies, American pilots faced the deadliest Nazi weapon, the pride of the Führer, the German jet fighters of the Luftwaffe. But as these fighter pilots took on Nazi jets over the skies of Berlin, back home in the Freeman Army Airfield in Indiana, their brother-in-arms who were fighting another two black officers were arrested and court-martialed because they rejected the segregation imposed by the US military, trying to get into the officers' club reserved for white officers. And together, the pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group in Ramitelli and the pilots of the 477th Bombardment Group in Freeman Field, they were fighting two wars against Nazism and fascism in Europe and against discrimination and segregation at home. These pilots are known as Tuskegee Airmen or Red Tails, and their famed mission to Berlin was the longest mission of the 15th Air Force during World War II, and it was a huge success. And for that mission, and for other 1,500 missions overseas, the US Congress voted to award the Tuskegee Airmen a Congressional Gold Medal. The award was presented to the surviving Tuskegee Airmen on March 29, 2007, at the ceremony in the Rotunda in the US Capitol, in recognition of their unique military record, which inspired revolutionary reform in the armed forces. So today I will talk about this extraordinary story of these men and women who helped win the war and changed the American military, marking a new beginning for American military and for American society too. And what I would like to do is to present this story in a different point of view, or maybe in a little known point of view, which is the Italian point of view, because as you know, the Tuskegee Airmen served in Italy in 1944 and in 1945 in a little town, the town of Campomarino, the town where I live, where the Ramitelli Airfield, the home of the Tuskegee Airmen, was located. But to better understand this story, I think we have to start from the beginning. In 1925, there was a report about the use of black manpower in wartime. This was done by the US Army War College, and there were a lot of claims that were just not true. That blacks were lazy, shiftless, immoral, dishonest, smaller brain, not patriotic. If you put them in combat, they turn and run. And of course, they were considered incapable of doing advanced jobs, such as flying a plane. But if we talk about the aviation, we have a lot of examples of African Americans leading the way for World War II pilots. Eugene Bullard was one of the first African American military pilots, even if he flew for France and not for the United States. And Bullard was one of the few black combat pilots during World War I. Queen Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman is the earliest known black person to earn an international pilot's license. And the story of Bessie Coleman is something extraordinary. She's still an example, and she has been an example for all the generations that have followed. But it's not only about aviation. African Americans had participated in every conflict since the Revolutionary War, including World War I. However, in 1940, the number of African American pilots in US Armed Forces was still 0. But 1940 was also an election year, and President Roosevelt was running for his third term, and in a bid to win the Black Vote, he promised to create black flying units. So the first squadron that was activated in Tuskegee was the 99 Pursuit Squadron, and the first class of the 99s graduated in March 1942, but they didn't go overseas for 13 months because the aviation was operating on segregated bases, so it was not possible to join them with other fighter groups, with white fighter groups. But in April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron shipped out of Tuskegee and was sent in North Africa. And when the Allied invaded Sicily in July 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron provided critical air support, earning a distinguished unit citation. And after the invasion of Sicily, Italy became the main theater of the war. The landing in Sicily and the armistice of September 8, 1943 was an important moment in Italian history. From that moment, Italy was divided in two by the Gustav Line. In the north, the territory was in the hands of the Italian Social Republic, a Nazi German puppet state led by the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. And in the south of the Gustav Line, there were the Allies, the British and the Americans, who were rising the peninsula after the landing in Sicily. So the Gustav Line stretched across the Italian peninsula and barred the way to Rome for the two Allied armies, the US 5th Army in the west and the British 8th Army in the east, on the Adriatic coast. And in this area, the Allied invasion stopped. American and British soldiers died by the thousands after the landing at Salerno on September the 9th, 1943. And in this context, a little-known area, the plain that goes from Foggia to Termoli, became very important for war operations because the Foggia airfield complex was located there. And after the armistice between Italy and the Allied armed forces, these airfields were seized by the German Luftwaffe. But using the Foggia airfield complex for strategic bombing missions would allow Allied heavy bombers to attack targets in France, in Germany, in Austria, and the Balkans, all areas that were not accessible from England. So if England was a platform for the missions in the North Europe, Italy became a platform for all the missions in Germany, in Austria, and in the territories that were still under the Nazi domination. So these are the most important operations that took place in Italy in that period. And I talked about Foggia, about the Foggia airfield complex. This area was very, very important for strategic reason, and for this reason, from July to October 1943, Foggia was attacked on 9 occasions, and more than 20,000 people died in the bombings. On October the 3rd, the British landed in Termoli, and after the Battle of Termoli, the entire area of the Foggia airfield complex was liberated. So we have 40 little airfields that passed into the hands of the Allies. This is a photo from the New York Times on September 27, 1943, and we can see the strategic position of the Foggia airfield complex. And this is Campo Marino, this is the town where I live. In Campo Marino, 5 airfields were built in 1944. 3 of them hosted the British Balkan Air Force. The other 2, Madna Airfield and Ramitelli Airfield, hosted the American 15th Air Force, and the Tuskegee Airmen served in these 2 airfields. That July, 3 new fighter squadrons from Tuskegee joined the 99th Fighter Squadron in Italy, and the 4th Fighter Squadron, the 99th, the 100, the 301st, and the 302nd, gathered into a single unit, the 332nd Fighter Group, and they were based for a couple of months in the little airfield of Madna. You can see in this photo the 5 little airfields in Campo Marino, and this is Madna. Today, I took this photo last week. So the Tuskegee Airmen were based for a couple of months in the Madna airfield, and then from June 1944 in the segregated airfield of Ramitelli. So I said, this is Madna, but what about Ramitelli, the home of the Tuskegee Airmen? What remains today of the Ramitelli airfield? As you know, today's Italy comes with 3,000 years of history, and much of this history is still preserved. And if we look closely, the Italy of World War II still exists. We have monuments, war cemeteries, museums, and all the places where the battle took place are still preserved in Italy. However, there is an important place where history has been overlooked in Italy. In the town where I live, 200 miles south of Rome, stands a building that has seen much better days. A building, like the story behind it, that needs to be preserved. This is the Ramitelli airfield in 1944, and this is the Ramitelli airfield headquarters today, in 2024. This location is now surrounded by fields, and this is the location where the Tuskegee Airmen took off in their B-51 Red Tails fighter planes, and they escorted American bombers over Europe. And with their bravery and courage, they saved the life of hundreds of bomber pilots and hundreds of crew members, bringing them back home safe. This exact spot represents the beginning of a movement, the fight for equality, and the winning of a war. I should say, the winning of 2 wars, a double victory, as I said before, against Nazism and against discrimination and segregation. And walking in these dusty streets today, as I usually do, is like going to a shrine where a group of aviators, where a group of pioneers have become legendary in American history and in Italian history too. Their contribution to the armed forces during World War II is very, very important and full of meaning, even also for the outcomes of the war. You can see the Ramitelli Air Base here in 1944 and in 2024. The Ramitelli Airfield was closed and dismantled in October 1945. In 3 years, Tuskegee had trained almost 1,000 pilots and some 50,000 support personnel. They'd flown 1,500 missions overseas. We can read the awards and decorations of the Tuskegee Airmen, 3 distinguished unit citations, 1 Silver Star, 96 distinguished flying crosses, 14 Bronze Stars, 744 Iron Medals, and 60 Purple Hearts. 84 Tuskegee Airmen lost their lives during World War II, but they created an astounding record of success, and due in part to the exemplary performance of the Tuskegee Airmen, on July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman signed the Executive Order 9981, ending segregation in the armed forces. So, what is the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen? In addition to their combat achievements, the Tuskegee Airmen played a very important role in breaking down racial barriers, not only in the military, but also in American society. And their legacy continues today to inspire and empower people all around the world. We have a photo here of George Hardy. He was here. He's one of the example of the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were men with bravery, with courage, with the inner strength to overcome the odds of life in order to be recognized as citizens. Because in America, they were considered second-class citizens. Now, what are we doing in Italy to preserve and to share this legacy? Together with the World War II Foundation, I participated as a guide and a historical referent in the documentary, The Tuskegee Airmen, Return to Ramitelli. The documentary tells the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, of the Ramitelli airfield, and the story of Colette Holt. Colette Holt is the daughter of Tuskegee Airman Coleman Holt, and she traveled to Italy to understand the meaning of this double victory. She came to Italy in the place where his father served. And these are photos of the world premiere, which took place on February the 9th, 2023, at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. July 16, 2023, the municipality of Campomarino inaugurated, unveiled a monument dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen in the presence of Italian and American institutions. There were diplomats from American embassy, and also there were a US military representation. There were some officers from the USAF base of Aviano in the north of Italy. In the same day, my office, the cultural office of the municipality, unveiled this mural, this painting, dedicated to Benjamin O. Davis Jr. Benjamin O. Davis was the commander of the 332nd Fighter Group. He is the first African-American general in US aviation. His father, Benjamin O. Davis Sr., was the first general in American Army. When I was thinking about this little speech, I said to myself, I want to speak for at least 10 minutes about Benjamin O. Davis, because he was an extraordinary man. He was an example for all African American communities in the United States. So with this painting, with this mural, we are trying to preserve also the legacy. This is our homage to Benjamin O. Davis. And these are some photos of the Red Tails Museum. This is the only museum dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen outside of the United States. I founded this museum in 2020. Now I'm the director of this museum. It's a little museum. And my goal, my mission is to invite and involve schools and young generations, because in Italy, young generations don't know enough about World War II. And I think they need to understand the importance of the ideas of freedom, of democracy, of equality. So this is the way the community of Campo Marino and Ramitelli is trying to preserve the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. Because my community is a community that took the Tuskegee Airmen in without any kind of discrimination in a period in which we were under fascism. The fascism was something horrible in Italy, but my little community integrated the Tuskegee Airmen even in that period. So this is a story that we are trying to commemorate, that we intend to commemorate again for a long time. Thank you.